We welcome you here today, and today's hearing is on the state of Ethiopia's democracy and its effect on humanitarian and human rights situation in the Ogaden region and Somalia. Political and human rights conditions in Ethiopia have been a particular concern to this committee for some time. Congressman Smith and I introduced the bill during the last Congress to push for releases of all political prisoners, accountability and democratization in Ethiopia. But Congressman Smith and I were unable to get the bill through. As you know, in a few minutes, the House of Representatives will finally take up H.R. 2003, the Ethiopian Democracy and Accountability Act. The Ethiopian government has spent tens of thousands of dollars to lobby to kill this bill. I hope that the message goes out loud and clear. This particular group of congresspeople and this subcommittee in Congress is not for sale. I was cautiously optimistic in 2005 that political and human rights conditions would improve after the elections. Indeed, the elections were much better organized and highly competitive compared to previous elections, and we commended the government about this at that time. I must confess, though, that I was wrong because I was optimistic, because in fact, the conditions got worse than before. For example, Alim, a young Ethiopian woman who I met last month somewhere in Africa, said it best in her testimony last November, and I had the opportunity to visit her while I went through the continent in August. I'm reading this to you so that you can understand the level of suffering under this regime. Here's what Alim said. On November 1, 2005, my mother was taken away from us. My father is one of those who had been elected to the Addis Ababa City Council. As we were seated at lunch, armed federal and security forces stormed into the house. They started beating my father as they took him away. My mother walked behind them and saying that he was a peaceful man, not deserving this kind of treatment, this kind of behavior by the authorities. She then took a hit with a club to the side of her chest. And as she turned away, she was shot in the same spot as she fell. As she was struggling to get up, they shot her again. I ran towards her, and they started to shoot at me, said the daughter. It is only by God's mercy that I escaped, as my own mother's eyes seemed to be pleading for help. While she was fighting for her life, I was forced to run for mine and hide in a house in the neighborhood. The security man who killed her mother still has the job in Addis. He told them, I will not kill my wife twice. The father was asked in prison, and that's why he said that, to sign a paper saying that his wife died of a heart attack. And that's when he said that he would not kill his wife twice. He spent more time in prison because of that. Not only this man lost his wife, but he also lost his daughter, who had to flee the country. This is just one example, but there are thousands like this. And I'm sure you've heard about the atrocities in the Ogaden, in Oromia, in Gambela. In fact, the photographs that you see in your folder to the members here are two Ogaden women who were hanged and left for dead. You can see the scars on their necks. I guess these are the extremists and terrorists that we hear so much about by our government officials. And these were just women who live in that area, and you can still see on the neck where the ropes were. The close ties that this administration has forged with the Menace regime has been a source of major concern to many of us. Even the State Department's human rights reports have documented abuses. Instead, we continue to provide military assistance to the government of Ethiopia while failing to take a consistent, outspoken stance in support of democracy and human rights at the highest levels of our government. Instead, we have actually been apologists for the dictatorship. The Ethiopian government has released a number of high-profile political prisoners in recent months, and some people say this is progress. The fact remains that thousands of other people remain in jail. Several hundred were just arrested last month, and no one has been held accountable for the deaths of nearly 200 people in the wake of the 205 elections. And repression of the opposition politicians, journalists, and members of civil society just continues, almost unabated. In April, the government of Ethiopia launched a major military campaign in the Ogaden, allegedly against the ONLF. Yet the targets and victims have largely been civilians. Indeed, some see the Ethiopian campaign as retaliation for the attack by the ONLF, in which 77 people, mainly Ethiopian security personnel, were killed. But one must go back and look at the record carefully. The attack on the Ogaden did not start this year. In fact, the ONLF did join the current government in 1991, hoping to find a peaceful solution. In the 1992 regional elections, the ONLF won the majority of the seats. The ONLF left the government after the current government began to kill and arrest its leadership during the early 90s. The Ethiopian military has been engaged in numerous human rights abuses against civilians in the Ogaden and in Somalia, including killings, beatings, and rapes. We will hear about them in detail from our witnesses today. Humanitarian situation in the Ogaden and in Somalia are dire as well. On September the 13th, the United Nations Children's Fund warned that over 13,000 children in Somalia were so malnourished that they may die, while nearly 70,000 others suffer from malnutrition. The situation is exacerbated by the Ethiopian government's military campaign in the Ogaden, the World Food Program's food delivery that were disrupted. The International Committee of the Red Cross was expelled, and Doctors Without Borders have been denied permission to resume work in that area. Conditions have become so dire that Ogadenis are fleeing to neighboring Somalia in search of relief. I strongly believe that the state of democracy in Ethiopia has a strong impact on what we are witnessing in Somalia and in the Ogaden today. I hope that during the course of this hearing, our witnesses will discuss their understanding of the current state of democracy in Ethiopia, as well as the human rights and humanitarian situation in the Ogaden. The United States cannot afford to allow cooperation on the war on terror prevent us from taking a principled stance on democracy and basic human rights issues. I thank all of the witnesses for coming and now turn over to our ranking member, Mr. Smith, for his remarks.
Thank you very much.